travel to the area of Edinburgh.
It's just a wonderful place.
Forget finding any hustle or bustle.
Full of history, old homes. I really like where we live. It's quiet.
Just beyond the small town's boundaries lies the laid-back crossroads of Lantz Mills.
It's just a glorious little spot of heaven.
An invisible history flows through this hamlet, sitting in silence for centuries in the heart of Shenandoah County.
There is so much information that is gone or missing that I strive to revitalize.
Kathleen Brockway is changing the narrative.
So I'm here to tell a story about a treasured piece of deaf history.
This deaf historian's mission is personal.
Upon my, family research, this kept coming up. This idea of a large deaf group who lived here.
Lantz Mills' roots stretch back to the 1760s, when a family with deaf loved ones settles here.
This area, Lantz Mill, was a deaf village where both hearing and deaf alike used sign language to communicate.
During the 18th and 19th centuries, the number of deaf neighbors grows by the dozens.
Because this was a deaf space, and historically this is where deaf people came and they felt free.
The Washington-based historian is uncovering oral histories of the deaf who called Lantz Mills home, their contributions ignored by traditional history books.
These hidden stories are missing from the research, and I'm fascinated by that history and filling in that gap. So I need to fulfill the deaf history and fill those gaps to tell the full story of deaf people.
Long ago in Virginia, the deaf and people with other disabilities were afforded few, if any, protections. By law, they couldn't even own land.
But that was not the case here in Lantz Mill. There were several deaf people who owned huge farms, including one 94-acre farm. There were properties all around this area, and there were deaf-owned businesses over in that direction.
One of those successful stores is founded by William Christian, a deaf man who owned and operated a funeral and carpentry business. The foundations and ruins of Christian's woodshop still exist.
This was a very busy area. There was actually lots of traffic, lots of stores, several mills.
It's the everyday story of Virginians that really make our history so rich. And Lantz Mills is just one example of that.
Nan Carmack with the Library of Virginia is collaborating with Kathleen to preserve and promote the story of this little-known landmark.
But I cannot think of a more representative story than Lantz Mills, of the power of community to overcome whatever needed to be overcome and to thrive.
Nan says Kathleen's contributions enhancing deaf culture across the Commonwealth can't be measured.
I feel like the history is, until Kat came along, was pretty well fading away.
I had no idea how much history was here.
Katie Marr lives on Four Leaf Farm, the former 19th century homestead of the Christian family who owned the carpentry business.
I'm a history buff, so to know that was happening right across the creek, that was really neat.
Katie admires Kathleen for shedding light on the generations of forgotten and marginalized Virginians.
Even people that lived here didn't know, and not just us. There's people all up and down these roads back here that probably don't know the history.
They used a completely different sign language here.
It was common when they passed on, many deaf people were buried in unmarked graves. But at Lantz Mills Union Forge Cemetery, the deaf find dignity even in death.
This was rare. This was a rare place to have identifiable tombstones of real deaf people.
Digging through archives and climbing the family tree is also leading Kathleen to her roots.
100% proud to be here. I am proud of my deaf history and the deaf community.
The historian discovers the graves of distant deaf relatives.
It's inspiring to stand here among all those buried here. And I feel like they're all here watching me in spirit.
By about 1970, with businesses closing and opportunities elsewhere, many deaf families move away from Lantz Mills, signaling the end of the once bustling village where the hearing and deaf people lived in harmony.
Yes, they were welcomed. They were welcomed here.
As she ponders and pieces together the past, Kathleen Brockway hopes a more comprehensive story of the deaf in Virginia will endure, loud and clear.
We should remember Lantz Mills because it's an important aspect of deaf history, which shows that we had deaf spaces. We had freedom.
For I Have a Story, I'm Greg McQuade, CBS 6 News.